It's the Sittin Sportside podcast, exclusively on 1045theteam.com.
And welcome in. No music today on the 1045 The Team Sittin Sportside podcast. We are back after a bit of a hiatus, but we're going to give you the third base rankings, the third base preview fantasy baseball show, and we're getting into draft mode here, so we're going to have to ramp it up in terms of outfield, starting pitching, and relief pitching all coming up. I think the outfield, Bryce Harper has signed. Thank goodness. That was last week. We're going to have the outfield up pretty soon as well. I think I'm going to wait a couple days. I think we're going to possibly say either Wednesday or Thursday we will have the rest up, and then the previews will start. And I can't believe that we're coming up upon it, but I believe it's either the 19th, 20th, or 21st, 2 of those 3 days, that the Mariners and Athletics will be playing. So for 1,000% sure that I am 1,000% sure, I am guaranteeing it that I will be doing my AL West preview first, of course, because those are two teams from that division playing early before that series. But then you only have a few more days, about a week, till the real season starts. So we'll have the division previews up. And then, of course, Mike James will give his take at some point. But all the others, youtube.com/team1045. Click on the Sittin Sportside podcast playlist. You can get there from 1045theteam.com on the podcast tab. Click on Sittin Sportside podcast. That's how you're going to get to this podcast, the third base podcast. Looking at the third base position, as well as the others. Catcher's up, first base is up, second base and shortstop, as well as 6 players who killed it down the stretch last season that I will talk to about my expectations for them this season. So let's get going. Third base, the same rankings I'm using, and they've been updated. We've seen things happen, and these have been updated, but not much really has changed in the third base position, I don't think. But there's a really intriguing player that is available only at third base that is going to be a buzz in your fantasy draft. So let's get to it. The number one fantasy third baseman, and I've said this in other podcasts, maybe I haven't, but these are based on rankings by a guy who mainly plays, I believe, category-based leagues. I give my takes on points leagues, so it's actually a good mix. I thought it's a relatively good mix. The rankings are based on category, and I give my spin on points leagues. So there's a good mix here. I just think this is my guy on ESPN that I follow very well. And I like his rankings. That's what we're going with. And regardless of that, you're going to get your rankings of certain players. And the number one third baseman he has is Jose Ramirez. And I look at Jose Ramirez and I say 1,000%. How can you not like this guy as your number one? If you're talking just straight points leagues, total bases, he had one of the most total bases all last season. Stole 34 bases with 39 home runs. This is a guy you want in any type of league. He gets on base, 106 walks. That's one of the best in all of baseball. For me, I don't know if it's not top. I'm not even sure it ranks top 5 in all of baseball. But my point is the fact that he walked over 100 times. I get the 80 strikeouts. It's actually not that much. It's actually not that much. So points leagues, he's a darling because of that, because he's getting you 39 home runs, 34 stolen bases. He's a darling everywhere else. I'm 1,000% all over, and I keep saying 1,000%, but I am all over Jose Ramirez. I think he should be the first person off the board. So in terms of that, he is the number one guy, undisputed. Now the question that we've been posing in other ones is there any other third baseman you would accept taking over him? I am somebody that loves Nolan Arenado as well, and I do think that Nolan Arenado is acceptable to take over him. If you're in a points league, I think you got to go Jose Ramirez. Consistency-wise, Arenado has been more than consistent to where he plays in Colorado. He's had over 30 home runs, 38 home runs, and 37 home runs or more the last 4 seasons. The lowest RBI output was last year at 110. Problem is he's not stealing you any bases. And if you're especially in a category league, you want stolen bases as well as a good average, as well as the home runs and RBIs. I guess you're probably going with Jose Ramirez because he's getting you 30-some stolen bases. That's why he's probably the undisputed number one pick, especially for category and rotisserie leagues. But for me, points leagues, I'm okay with Nolan Arenado. Strikeouts are higher for Nolan Arenado than Jose Ramirez. The walks are lower. The home runs are about the same. It doesn't get as many stolen bases. So I think that Jose Ramirez is the undisputed number one pick based on last year. But consistency, Jose Ramirez had that type of season for the first time. Sure, he batted 318 the year before, which is better than the 270, but 10 less home runs in that year and 17 less, half of the stolen bases. So we haven't seen Jose Ramirez do what he did last year, which is insane, multiple times. I'm still taking him first, but if you think that the consistency of what knowing what you're going to get of Nolan Arenado, which is still very, very elite numbers, and the average was better, if you're going on the average last year from Jose Ramirez, Arenado's average was better, I have no problem with taking Nolan Arenado over Jose Ramirez. But based on last season and my expectations for this year, I still would probably pick Jose Ramirez number 1 overall. Moving forward, we've touched on Alex Bregman in the Shortstop podcast. Of course, Javier Baez. We haven't touched on Chris Bryant yet. But real quick on Bregman and Baez, those are two really good players. I think that they're definitely the next people off the board after Ramirez and Arenado. But if you're not taking as your third baseman, if you're taking Bregman as a shortstop, cool. If you're taking Baez as a second baseman or shortstop, but we're talking just straight third baseman, it's Ramirez, Arenado, and definitely think about Alex Bregman, but he's probably more valuable to you as a shortstop. Same thing with Baez. He's probably more valuable to you as a shortstop or second baseman than he is third baseman because he's moved down the list to Chris Bryant. He's ranked 28th on this list. He might be even going lower. This is a guy who had a really tough season last year with injuries and just turned into a guy that people really, let's be frank, it was a bad year. He only played 102 games. He was very much plagued by injuries, but to only end up with 13 home runs after putting up 39, 29, 26, not necessarily in that order, but a lot of home runs in his previous 3 seasons, which were basically all full seasons. It's a very disappointing year for Chris Bryant. And it's surprising to think that he's only clipped 100 RBIs once. Of course, got 99 in his rookie season, but he's kind of underwhelmed in certain aspects, and no one's going into this season, I think, more with a chip on his shoulder more than Bryant was. He's really embracing the fact that people were saying he was going to get traded and whatnot and all there in the media. So I am all over Chris Bryant to have a really good bounce back year. Take him in the third round, 1,000%. Once again, using the 1,000%. I'll try to stop on that. But Chris Bryant, you gotta draft him. I think if he's there around 28 with you, and you're hovering in that area around some other pieces that you could possibly get. I get you're going to see you're going to see some starting pitchers there like Aaron Nola. You're going to see the young stud in Juan Soto. But I do believe the third base, while it's not a shallow position by any means, I think it's a guy you want to take up that position. Because past that, I go into the fourth round with Anthony Rendon. I think a middle rounder who's still undervalued, and Eugenio Suarez. Those are guys that I'm willing to have as well. But the elite of the elite, I think Chris Bryant, if you're talking about the elite that only have third base eligibility, of course he's going to have outfield eligibility as well. But Jose Ramirez, Nolan Arenado, and Chris Bryant. It used to be Chris Bryant. Now he's ranked after some guys like Bregman and Baez who have all their eligibilities. But of course, I think Bryant still belongs in that conversation. And if you can get him at a cheaper price than those guys, which you are, you're not going to have to spend a first-round pick on him. You're going to get huge dividends if you draft Chris Bryant in the third round. So don't let him slip. And if he's slipping, you got to take your advantage and go out and get him. Anthony Rendon, though, in the fourth round. And in the middle round, around the fifth round, well, middle round, not really the middle round, but around the fifth round, you're looking at Eugenio Suarez. Rendon, he drives in a lot of runs. 92 runs batted in last year. Before that, 100. He hovers around mid-20s in the home runs, and his average always seems to be around 300 the last couple of seasons. So he's a guy who's really putting it together. I think he's quietly still really, really good and doesn't get a lot of attention. I think that's a guy that's going to get you a lot of not stolen bases, but total bases in terms of a point league. And that's the guy that I'm willing to take a little bit later than the other two because I say, look, this is a guy who's putting up a lot of total bases. He's not necessarily striking out as much as guys like Arenado or Chris Bryant. So he's not walking at a high rate, but he gets on base in terms of hitting. His slugging percentage is pretty good, and he doesn't strike out a lot. I'm all for Anthony Rendon because, especially in a points league, because the strikeouts, the lack of the strikeouts is very, very, very exciting. Let's talk about Eugenio Suarez, though, a guy who continues to fall under the radar, and he seems to have that third base position locked down in Cincinnati. We all know about Nick Senzel, but I'll be honest with you, and I brought him up in the second base podcast. I know that third base is another possibility. He's probably playing in the outfield because this guy has been very good. 34 home runs and 104 RBIs last year. I'm not sure when people realize what Eugenio Suarez did for the Reds really the last couple of years, but especially last year with 30-plus home runs, 100 RBIs, about a 283. And with the strikeouts in this points league, they're going to hurt. 142 strikeouts or more the last 3 seasons. So he's a guy who's going to go down swinging an awful lot, but I'm willing to take that risk because he's putting up big-time numbers, not as good enough doubles. I mean, Anthony Rendon was hitting like 40-some doubles. So that's why Rendon ranks definitely higher than him. Better average, home runs, probably around the same. I mean, Suarez hit 10 more home runs than him, but I like what Suarez is going to have. But in terms of Rendon and Suarez, I'm still looking at Suarez overwhelmingly. But Rendon is the guy you probably want a little bit more. Let's go to the guy I was alluding to earlier who's third base eligible, who's going to get a lot of hype in your drafts, and you might have to really spring on him if you want him, getting a ton of hype. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., of course, son of Hall of Famer Vladimir Guerrero. He's real. A lot of people know who Juan Soto is now, especially if you're listening to this podcast and you're a fantasy baseball guy. You knew who Juan Soto was. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know who Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is. But just in case you don't, this is going to sound weird, but he's the Juan Soto before Juan Soto. When Juan Soto got called up last year, I looked at his numbers and I said, these are the minor league numbers. These are Vladimir Guerrero Jr. numbers. He was just put in a position where the Nationals needed help in the outfield, and he got the position, and he didn't let it go. Guerrero is going to do the same thing, maybe better. The problem is we don't know what's going on with Toronto. Toronto should have him up in 2 weeks once they get that full year of control. He's Chris Bryant-esque. I already mentioned Chris Bryant in terms of he'll be up. Don't worry, he'll be up. So I wouldn't be too concerned about him not being up for the entire season because you're going to take the hit of 2 weeks of no Vladimir Guerrero Jr. That's fine with me. But where are you supposed to draft him? Like, where should you draft Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? I'm not sure. The 65th pick is where he's ranked in the rankings that I look at. And I think that's fair. I think you're going to have some people taking him in the 40s. I think you're going to have some people taking him in the fifth round. I think it's really up to you. I know in my league he's going to be kept. That's how good of a player this is. He hasn't played one major league day, doesn't have one at bat or plate appearance, but he's going to be kept before the season. That's how much the hype is there, and the hype is real. I personally, where do I rank Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? Well, if he's going to have third base eligibility, I think I do take him in the mid round of 5th or 6th. I do think that's where he's deserved to have it. He's that good. He's going to be that guy. And Chris Bryant was drafted in like the 10th round the year I had that he came up. So I think that there's more hype around Guerrero Jr. It depends on where you feel like you think you're willing to put somebody who hasn't even played one pitch in Major League Baseball is going to do. But the hype is real. The player is real. I go for it. Now, do you take Matt Carpenter or Miguel Andujar over him? The next two, let's go 3. Justin Turner. Those are 3 guys that are hovering around the same area. Do you take him over him? Carpenter, I mentioned him in the first base podcast, so I'm not going to get into much of Matt Carpenter here. But the inconsistencies of him on the bookends of the years makes you think, you know what, I'll take Vlad over him. Miguel Andujar. Well, there's so much, I don't want to say questions, but if he's not good enough defensively, which I think he's fine, don't worry about it. But if he starts to struggle, and you have DJ LeMahieu, and Didi Gregorius is back, where, is there a chance Andujar loses some playing time? The guy is legit. He hit so many doubles down the stretch last year. He was one of the best hitters, if not the best hitter for the Yankees during chunks of last season. So I am all over Andujar. Still think I would probably take Guerrero Jr. over him. And last but not least, Justin Turner. Don't get me wrong. All these guys are worth a 7th round or an 8th round pick. But Justin Turner, I probably would not draft over Vladimir Guerrero Jr. because I'll get more home runs with Vlad, and I'll probably get an average close, not too bad. I know the 312 average is why you're buying it on Justin Turner. The 31 doubles, the total bases that you're getting from him is big. And the on-base percentage of 406 from last year. I think this is a guy you don't want to sleep on at all, but I think for terms of ceiling, you're drafting Vlad. And I think Justin Turner, though, an overall analysis of him, he's got actually a very, very high floor for an 8th round draft pick. And I would actually look at him as a huge sleeper. And that's where we're getting into our sleepers. We're not into our deep sleepers yet, but we're into our sleepers territory. Matt Chapman seems to be very much a sleeper. Will Myers as well, and Josh Donaldson all are going to be taken in the double-digit rounds most likely. Matt Chapman is a guy a lot of people have their eye on. I think his offense is going to improve. He went to the same high school as Nolan Arenado. His defense is unmatched. So this is a guy that I look at and I say, look, you take a chance on him because he's put together very good defensive numbers last year, but offensively 24 home runs, very good 278 average. But in a points league, do I want it with the 146 strikeouts? Well, the slugging percentage is there, 508, 42 doubles, 24 home runs. He drove in 68 runs. That could improve if he's hitting higher in a lineup with a guy like Chris Davis there, the good Chris Davis. I'm all over Matt Chapman. The strikeouts are there, but I'm all over the numbers that he is producing, and he's not taking it out of the lineup. The glove is too good. He will stay in the lineup regardless. So you're very much going to get a whole season then of Matt Chapman, injuries pending, which is the truth for everybody here. Will Myers also going to be playing in the outfield, but he still has the third base eligibility. I think you take a look at him too with the help around his lineup. Josh Donaldson is a huge bounce back candidate. He's one of the best players in all of baseball. Not too long ago. If he gets back to any type of form on a good Braves team that has Freddie Freeman hitting in front or behind him or whatever it is, probably in front of him, I'm all over Josh Donaldson. Around this time, you're taking your chance on Donaldson. You're taking your chance on Mike Moustakas and Travis Shaw, who could both have second base eligibility as well. We already know Shaw does have second base eligibility, but Mike Moustakas are going to get everyday playing time because Jonathan Scope is gone. So they're going to be getting everyday playing time, assuming the defense isn't so bad that they call up second base prospect Keston Hiura. But those are guys that I'm willing to take. Jurickson Profar, that's a guy that is going to be eligible at shortstop and first base. We talked about him a little bit, but also third base. I'll probably take him as a shortstop, so that's where I'll stop it here, but he's still a good guy to keep your eye on. And now let's get to players that I'm not too high on. Max Muncy, can he do it again? We talked about him a little bit on the First Base podcast maybe, but man, I don't know if I can trust Max Muncy again for a third base. Maybe. If he's third base eligible for you, that's great. But can he do what he did last year? Call me a hater. Rafael Devers. He's got all the talent in the world. 21 home runs last year. Very, very impressive in terms of the power numbers. But you have a guy named Michael Chavis. We'll talk about Michael Chavis a little bit later in this podcast. But he's a guy that you got to be scared for if you're owning Rafael Devers going into this season. That being said, these are middle players. I think I'm going with Yuli Gurriel if he's third base eligible, more than I'm going with Muncy or Devers. And that's where I'm at with it. Miguel Sano is going to be out a couple months. I think is a worthy pick to see if you can catch fire in a bottle when he comes back. And you're going to tell me crazy, but Muncy's got the better floor. Sano is the guy that I'm willing to take a chance on a few rounds later, stash him on the DL, and hope that he's better than the interim Escobar or Seager that you're going to have. And Kyle Seager could have a bounce back year too. The problem is he continues to play in a Seattle ballpark that is not friendly to him, and he hit 221 last year, which I don't love, but he's a guy that has been good at this third base position and has the chance to prove to people I can still play. This is where we're getting into some weird territory. These are the deep sleeper territories. I really like what Evan Longoria and Jake Lamb can do in this area. I think that they're guys that are both had success in the past. Obviously, Longoria a little bit more proven than Jake Lamb, but they had bad years last year. Longoria could be moved at some point, and you're still talking about a guy who could hit you in the high 270s, get you about 20, 25 home runs, and drive in a healthy chunk amount of home runs. Jake Lamb, on the other hand, has really only one great season under his belt. Two okay seasons under his belt. And he's coming off a really bad injury-plagued season last year as well, but he's going to have everyday first base at-bats. So he'll be dual eligible for you at a first base position, I think. That's going to be a little bit shallow, as I mentioned in that podcast. And here he is, going to be getting everyday at-bats at first base with Paul Goldschmidt gone. I think he could easily turn back the time to a year or two ago when he was really, really good. Get him in the late 20 rounds? Man, stop it. I'm all over Jake Lamb. Yammer Candelario, very, very good player that I think maybe is a better baseball player than he is fantasy player. Problem is, the average was at 224 last year. If he can get that average up to what he was able to do in limited time for Detroit in 2017, which was, of course, a very small sample size, but he got 330 average, I like what he can do. But as long as the average is still hovering around 220, obviously, even if it's at 250, I can't endorse him. But if he can get his average to where it was, like around 300, not where it was, but around 300, still put up the power numbers, maybe say 20, 25 home runs, he's a sleeper. But in a points league, the strikeouts are really, really going to hinder you. I wanted to talk about a guy that I mentioned real quick before I go into a list of some really, really deep sleepers that I'll list, but they're not guys, and maybe I didn't say this in the past, but they're not guys you want to draft necessarily, but you want to keep your eye on, or maybe take a very, 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 very late round chance on them. But that's why they're called deep sleepers. That's what I mean by that. Guys who could be very important. But I want to talk about this Michael Chavis. He's really making a statement in spring training. He's hit, I believe, 4 home runs already. He's a third base prospect. He was suspended last year, I believe, because of performance-enhancing drugs. So he's doing really, really good, and he could be a very big competition for, obviously, Rafael Devers and Eduardo Nunez and those guys. So I would keep my eye on him, especially in a Red Sox lineup that could be really, really good. He's probably going to be a very hot commodity when he does get called up, so keep your eye on him early. Maybe get stay on Twitter, stay around some other people who know a lot what's going on in Pawtucket. Maybe it happens early, right out of spring training. But at the very least, I would say this is a guy who's probably going to get a ton of hype once the announcement is made. So if you're willing to have an empty spot, and Chavis might be the guy. If you're not someone that buys into hot springs, but if you're not someone that buys into that, maybe be wary. But I think he's really much worth the attention. And if he breaks spring training, he could steal third base from Devers and be such a valuable pick at probably a very, very, very cheap price. Some deep sleepers. I think Matt Duffy is a deep sleeper. For Tampa Bay, could be an underrated offense out there in Tampa Bay, and he could do really, really good for them. Guy had 294 last year. If he's playing the entire season, the power numbers aren't good enough. The 22 doubles leaves something to be desired, but the average-wise, if he can add a little bit more pop to his game, he's a guy who has some potential, but the lack of total bases probably does put a cap on him just a little bit. Zach Cozart has put together some really good seasons in the seasons past. He was out basically all last year after 58 games after he injury shortened his season. We know what he did a lot in Cincinnati the 2 years before that, especially the year of 2017 where he had 297. He's a guy that I would take a look at and say, look, he's going to have every opportunity to take some of the days out there playing third base. If he does well, maybe he'll do just fine in that place. Neil Walker getting everyday at-bats could be somebody to hook on to if you need it. He's also available at second and first. We mentioned Isaiah Kiner Falefa in the catcher podcast, but he's also worth the option to look at there because he's eligible at catcher as well. And then last but not least, actually no, let's go into Aledmus Diaz, Jung Ho Kong, Youngers Solarte. Those are my last big three. I'll start with Aledmus. He's on a Houston team that has a really good offense. If he gets somehow, he's eligible at third base and shortstop. If he somehow gets a path to everyday at bats, possibly at a DH. I don't know where. Maybe he's playing shortstop and Correa's DHing, or maybe he DHs. I don't know. But he has some path possibly to some at-bats there if Tyler White doesn't pan out. I know there's Kyle Tucker and all those. I would at least just keep my eye on Aledmus Diaz for that reason and that reason alone, because if he's in that lineup 5 days a week, he could be worth taking a look at, especially at positions like third base and shortstop that might be a little shallow. Jung Ho Kong might be better off being traded because you have Colin Moran, who I need to mention here. One of those two are going to get every day at third base. If Gong continues to play really well in spring training, it could put a really weird situation on the Pirates' hands of having either to trade him or start him every day at third base or start Moran at first base if Josh Bell doesn't do well. It's just going to be a mess, and that's why you have to stay away from Moran or Jung Ho Kong. But those are two guys, Moran and Gong, that I'm looking at. Gong more than Moran because of the ceiling, the potential. And so I'm looking at that and saying, you know what, maybe, just maybe, I'll go for Gong. I'll go for Gong. Go for gold. Go for Gong. I'll take a look at him. Keep your eye on him, as well as on Youngers Solarte, who's probably going to have some paths to everyday at-bats, maybe at third base for the San Francisco 49ers if Longoria is moved. I know they have Panic, Crawford, and Longoria second, short, third, Bell at first. Maybe Solarte can play some outfield. I don't know. I know they have Duggar and some other guys there. We'll get to the outfield podcast. Maybe even mention them. Just a weak outfield. But definitely put him on the watch list, Solarte, because if Longoria is moved, everyday at-bats for Solarte could lead to some pretty good total base numbers, because in his time when he does play, he had 17 home runs last year, 20 doubles. So he can put up numbers, especially if he can get that average to 250 or above. It would probably produce some value. Like he did last year, a little bit in Toronto, but especially in like the 2016 year for the Padres, that was some value. And if he gets that value in San Francisco, I get the ballpark isn't great, but he can get some value. Let's get to the essential third base selection. I know in the past I've gone with the top guy. I think I went to the top guy, and wasn't second base, maybe it was shortstop. I went with the top guy. I get that. But I got to say, it seems like a cop-out to say go for Jose Ramirez as the essential pick. So I'm going to go with Anthony Rendon just because of the slugging percentage, the impressive slugging percentage, the 44 doubles with the 25 home runs, especially in a points league, the low strikeout numbers. I'm going to go Rendon. He's got a good value pick, and he's not going to get you the 30 home runs that Ramirez is going to get you. He's not going to get you the stolen bases that Ramirez is going to get you. That's why Ramirez is such an anomaly at his position, probably because of the stolen bases he's going to get. But the essential pick, I like to get more of a value here, and with the price of Jose Ramirez being probably a top 5 pick in most drafts, I probably have to say Rendon is the guy that I want to get for you as the essential pick, and that's probably where you're looking at. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Sittin Sportside podcast. Third base, looking at the third base position, I will probably have this one up simultaneously with an outfield podcast. So if you're looking at outfielders, including the recently signed Bryce Harper, I fear this one went 26 minutes. I fear that one's going to go longer. Hopefully, I'll cut it to a little bit shorter, but that's that podcast. That's on 1045theteam.com, Podcast Labs, Sittin Sportside Podcast. I'll take you to the Sittin Sportside Podcast playlist on youtube.com. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time on the Sittin Sportside Podcast.